From the National Museum of African American Music in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Just Conversations, presented by the Metro Human Relations Commission.
Welcome to this Just Conversations episode on food insecurity, being filmed at the National Museum of African American Music. I'm your host, Carter Ha, with Holland Hill. I'll let our panelists from left to right introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Rasheedat Fetuga, and I am the founder of Gideon's Army. Gideon's Army is a grassroots organization that focuses on strategic peace building for Nashville.
My name is Jennifer Justus. I'm a freelance food writer, but I also work full-time at the Nashville Food Project, and our mission is to grow, cook, and share nourishing food with the goals of cultivating community and alleviating hunger in our city.
Hello, my name is Sarai Tovar, and I work for the branch of Nashville as a food pantry in the southeast area in our community.
My name is Jim Myers. I've worked in and around the food system in Nashville from the journalism side, chronicling the food history of Nashville, also in the food production side, the food insecurity side with a nonprofit called Community Food Advocates, and am now helping managing a legacy restaurant called the Elliston Place Soda Shop.
Well, to get things started, I wanted to really talk about how food insecurity, it's of course not a new issue. It's been around in Nashville a long time. However, I wanted to hear your all's thoughts on, with the explosive growth that Nashville has experienced in the last 10 years, and of course is experiencing more so currently, is that giving it a whole new life as far as it affects the exact food insecurity and where that goes into incarceration and affordability and things of that nature?
Well, I would say the growth absolutely has affected it, but I think that what we've seen at the Nashville Food Project in the rise in food insecurity has, COVID-19 and going from the pandemic going from the tornado into the pandemic, it just was more than we had experienced before. But yes, the growth of Nashville, the Nashville Food Project started in this is our 10th anniversary. So we've sort of been around during that explosive growth, I feel like. So it's nothing we've never not known maybe or felt, I think, from the beginning.
Well, since I work at food pantry, I was just telling Jim that prior to COVID, we were serving about 174 families a week. And after COVID, we're serving about 700 plus a week. But just as the need arose, also the help arose as well. Mm-hmm. So since I work at a food pantry, I can tell you that whenever we have a need, we go out there and ask for it, and the needs are met. So it goes like in a balance.
Mm-hmm. And the pandemic, I hadn't thought of that, but that, of course, had a huge effect as well.
Yes.
I would say that the transition that Nashville is experiencing has really impacted a lot of families in lower income communities. One, because rent is increasing. A lot of families don't own their homes, and the ones who do, their tax rates increase, and then they have to choose between, paying for housing and paying for food. That's the biggest thing that I've seen. So a lot of times people reach out to Gideon's Army and they're asking for rental assistance and for food assistance, or one of the other, but it's almost always one of the two that people are struggling with. And when you talk to families, that has been like the major issue is the increase in rent. And then of course you add that COVID, in the middle of a pandemic to that, and it's just a disaster really.
Mm-hmm.
And so with Gideon's Army and the food pantry and Nashville Food Project, I feel like I'm surrounded by all the best people, but what can be done to address these issues as, of course, COVID isn't, even with the vaccine, it hasn't been crushed. There's still plenty of outbreaks and people unvaccinated and things of that nature, which are not letting it stop. So what can be done to help fight that?
I mean,
Its effect. Not.
I love that at this panel, like we collaborate with Gideon's Army, we collaborate with the branch. I think collaboration is really such a big piece of it, because we say at the Food Project a lot that all the good food in the world will not solve hunger. So it's really got to be about getting to the root of disrupting poverty. So that's why we like to work alongside organizations like yours to try to work together to make change. So I think collaboration and getting to the root of things to try to make a difference.
Yeah, definitely partnerships, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
We have, at the branch, we have also asked the same questions, just not put a Band-Aid to the problem, but actually get to be more involved with our clients. Say, instead of just coming once a month and getting food from us, also ask them, how are you doing? How can we help you? And it's kind of been a challenge now with COVID, because before they will go inside our facility and shop for themselves. That would bring them more, the experience will be different, and there will be a transaction, whether it be like we all together shopping and this is what I want, I don't want this. But with COVID, it's more of a drive-through. Here's your cart, here's your groceries, see you next month. And that's been a struggle for us too. So how can we start still building? So one of the things that the branch started working on is really making partners, not just, we offer here at the branch, we offer food, see you later, we cannot help you with your rent. No, who is out there in the community that's helping, advocating for you, that we can partner with and help you? And we partner with 54, we partner with H-Well, with the Nashville Food Project, and Hispanic Family Foundation. I haven't had a chance to partner with you, but I'm
can't wait.
Nice to meet you. But partnership, coming together as a community to help each other. So I think that's what's going to make a difference.
And someone had mentioned a correlation, I believe, in conversation with how this affects incarceration. And I was wondering if that was people who are looking at that as a way to be fed, as instead of having no home, or what exactly was the thought on the incarceration. I'm not sure who that was that had.
I think that might have come from us, that when you look at food insecurity as a web, or a web that is broken, that gentrification, poverty, housing insecurity, like all of these things, mass incarceration, deeply impact food security and create food insecurity. The reason it is important to look at incarceration, especially we pretty much service the North Nashville community. And there was a Brookings Institute study that came out that said that North Nashville has had the highest incarceration rate in the nation. And the issue with that in food security is what incarceration does to families. And so by removing someone from the home, instead of maybe looking at restorative alternatives that would keep people together, keep people in the home, instead of looking at looking at crime, criminalization from a public health issue, we are removing someone from the home who was bringing money into the home. So we've taken a resource, we've taken funding, and then it increases food insecurity within the community. But then when they come home, if they come home at any time, that is relevant, because some people are gone for their entire life, but there's oftentimes a lack of skills, social skills, because the world changes when you're incarcerated. The emotional deficits that you experience from being away from your family, like all of these things feed into food insecurity. And so when we're talking about these things, if you think about COVID, the transitions that Nashville is having with people moving in, people being pushed out of their communities because they can't afford to live in Nashville anymore, and then add on that incarceration and all of those things. And again, it's just so many different angles that people are being hit at that sometimes it's just hard to fight, and then families go hungry, and then they need the partnerships and the collaborations in order to at least stop some of the bleeding, apply pressure to the wound.
And on the note of North Nashville, just looking back even 10 years, so I mean, there was the flood, there was, in the last 2 years, there was the tornado, there was the bomb, there's the pandemic. It seems it's been hit as hard as any part of the state or the country, really. So of course we said community, people partnering, working together can fight it, but above and beyond that, what can people do to get there to that specific community and help with you all and other organizations too?
I think looking at the structural root causes, the fact that the city traditionally does not invest up front in creating economic structures for people in North Nashville. I read somewhere, and I can't remember, but it said that the opposite of, and don't quote me on this, okay, but that the opposite of poverty isn't wealth, that the opposite of poverty is justice. And there's a lot of injustices that happen in high poverty communities that really need to be addressed, that many of us have been working on for years, but there's just often a resistance from, our city leadership. And we continue in this cycle of poverty and violence and all the things that we're talking about here today.
And then affordability is the next thing I wanted to talk about, and we can kind of go around and address this different ways because I know we all have our own experiences, but whether it's farms donating to nonprofits or restaurants trying to find a happy medium between feeding everyone at the price point. I mean, you want everyone to be a customer. I believe, Jim, the quote, Lynn Chandler, everyone's a friend before a customer. Is that?
Yeah, the founder of the restaurant said you have to make a friend before you make a customer. But the affordability issue is huge, but it affects every part of the business. And I think we've touched on some of these issues. But COVID really laid bare some of the economic issues that we're facing, that everyone in the country is facing, but I think that really hit hard in Nashville and hit hard in the hospitality industry. These are typically low-paying jobs, that it's getting more and more difficult for people in the hospitality industry to find an affordable place to live in the city. We have a crisis of affordable housing in Nashville. We have a crisis of good and effective public transportation, so that if you have to live in a part of town that may be more affordable, is the public transportation robust enough to get you from where you live to where you want to work? And if that's downtown, the cost of parking downtown, if you do have your own transportation, is prohibitive. So all of these issues affect it. And we saw a lot of restaurants close during the pandemic because we saw how fragile the economic model is in that industry, that these are thin margin businesses. Now we're looking at the problems with supply chain issues and the costs of goods. The cost of food has gone through the roof. So I'm sure that affects all of these food security issues of just the price of chicken is crazy. The cost of to-go containers, all these things that not just affect restaurants that are struggling to reopen after a pandemic during a recession, affect pantries. They affect anyone trying to feed someone is affected by all of these economic issues. And COVID really laid bare those issues. But I think the thing that we're finding is this may be a watershed moment for living wages for people who work in restaurants, in the hospitality industry. That there needs to be some kind of realignment. Will that happen? I don't know, because then all of those things then go to the affordability of food or the affordability of eating out. As labor costs rise and food costs rise, then the cost of eating out goes up, and we find ourselves back in this ugly feedback cycle of why do people in low-income neighborhoods eat unhealthy diets of fast food or convenience food because it's cheap and affordable. And so now we've got this health feedback cycle to break out of. So it's all of these things, yes, are absolutely relatable with what we're going on right now.
And that's one thing my grandmother used to say was, why can't all these great ingredients, doesn't have to be the finest beef, but great produce, why can't that be available to everyone? Why does it have to be rotten stuff coming off shelves that's only accessible to parts of the city? And I know I've seen that, especially with the Nashville Food Project, with some farms, and Arnold and Anna, I believe, donate a decent amount too. So I think that's a good thing to see, and I wanted to hear kind of about how that helps and how you use that segue to feed people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think most of us probably know the stat now that 40% of food goes to waste. And so it's not a lack of abundance in this country, it's a lack of access. And so we do what we can in, our very small way to make sure to keep food out of the landfill as often as possible. So last year we recovered over 220,000 pounds of food that would have just gone to waste. We tell the story of a conference at Opryland Hotel, a meat conference that happens, I want to say, every other year. And from just that one conference, we took out of there 20,000 pounds of meat. Wow. That was just going to go to waste. And we can use that, for years. We keep it in a freezer actually down in Murfreesboro, and use that for a couple of years, I should say. But yeah, just it's disturbing that there is so much wasted, and we're grateful for farms, restaurants, places that conferences, Opryland, to let us in and do that, to be able to do what we can with it.
Yeah, the waste issue is something that, now that I'm working in a restaurant instead of writing about restaurants, the amount of waste that I see that we clear off of tables is staggering. That people order food and then don't finish food, and they don't take that home, so you can't reuse that food. That gets thrown away, and we've talked for years about the shift in perception of what a proper plate should look like. What is a proper diet? And the changes that have happened over the years, the supersizing of the eyes of America, of what we think a proper plate looks like, and it goes to the American sense of value, that if you serve someone a proper plate of food, will the average customer look at that and go, "Hey, you're ripping me off. I'm not getting what I'm paying for." So there's that battle of the perception of value versus what a proper healthy diet looks like or should look like on a plate. Even if you go to an antique mall and you buy one of those, a small diner plate from the 40s, it's a tiny little plate with tiny little compartments, but that's what it used to look like. Now, the plates that we even put on a table are huge. So there's this constant battle of portion size and in sense of value that businesses have to struggle with to keep customers coming in, to keep the perception of perceived value for your dollar, while at the same time you're battling these costs and trying to keep your prices down. And then that all figures into this staggering sense of waste, of consumer waste in terms of not consuming what you've ordered, because people fill up and they don't eat what they've ordered, which is heartbreaking to see when you think of the amount of hunger in this country. And then there's just the general waste in the industry of having ingredients that aren't used, that thankfully there are organizations that glean that, use it, and create meals to feed people. But it's interesting to see.
I mean, at the branch, if I'm say everything that people think is waste, we find a way to use. Even when we get a produce that is rotten, we have people that take it to use it on their compost or use it to feed their chicken. So we usually don't waste much at the branch. So we're trying to be creative on that aspect. Yeah.
And that's kind of what one of the biggest shames of it all is, that those restaurants and food establishments, hotels, going through the most volume and wasting the most are here downtown, and they do not do any of those practices. They do not compost or put it back into the earth in any kind of ethical way like that to pay it forward. And there, of course, are some exceptions, but for the most part, there's hordes of trash bags of waste food in the back alleys. So to close it out, I would just want to hear one last time around the circle, kind of looking forward to 2022, what we can all work toward to fight this even more so, unrelated to the pandemic this time, but just outside of disasters, what people can do to put their foot forward.
I think that it's really important to be civically engaged, for people to know what policies, laws, practices are impacting communities that are experiencing food insecurity. Of course, donate and give to organizations that are working on these issues, volunteer, because people power is really important. And then I would also say that people could just be maybe even more informed about food insecurity and the multiple layers of that, and how people and families are impacted, and continue to have these conversations. I know that sounds so cliche, but really talking about it, exploring, like, just people looking into it can have different thought, like creativity, thinking outside the box, things like that. The more we talk about it, the more ideas that we have and the more that we can do, I think.
I think she said it perfectly.
Yeah.
And I think the only thing I would reiterate for the people with means in the community to donate to organizations that are working on the ground, and to get involved if you don't have the means, and spend time volunteering. Because there's a lot of great work happening, and to educate yourself and know about that, and to get involved in the ways that you can, and maybe even for restaurants, be ready to pay more, when you go in, so that restaurants can pay their people what they need to, what a meal really costs. Because I don't feel like we have, when we eat out, we haven't been paying what it really costs, maybe in a lot of situations. So,
well, you guys said it so perfectly now that you make it hard for us to say something else. Just get to research what is it that you would like to help out. Like, what is it that I want to, where can I make an impact? Just think about what is it that will move you and just research that and go there. You will find it. I'm pretty sure that any part, whatever's your calling, you'll find it and then get plugged in.
Yes, all of the above. No, and we're trying to be more, as now that we've been open a few months, be more intentional with our relationship with our immediate community in Midtown and close to the communities off Charlotte. To be more engaged, we could work more with the food project to do that and be more efficient with our own food. And take care of our own people as well as we can. And think of what would Phila do, right?
What would Phila do? No food go to waste.
That's right.
Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for a great discussion, as well as the National Museum of African American Music for hosting us. Thank you for tuning in to this Just Conversations episode on food insecurity. To see other Just Conversation episodes, please visit www.justconversations.org.